10 years ago, a firm like Conduit Law was considered the alternative to how traditional law firms operate. Peter Carayiannis claims that this designation is not relevant anymore. That said, the virtual model that he created proved especially effective during this pandemic, and one that mainstream law firms scrambled to implement to a degree. And while some of them have been successful doing so, Peter thinks that traditional law firms will largely remain the same in the long run. Welcome to Law Firm Weekly. It's great to have you here. Peter Carayiannis is the founder and president of Conduit Law, a leading alternative model law firm. After practicing law for several years at a very large national law firm, as a corporate lawyer, Peter set out to build a new model of law firm focused on finding more efficient and effective ways of working with his clients and to deliver quality legal services. Peter, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, Shai, and good day to you.
I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your firm, maybe the elevator pitch on what you do, how you do it, and maybe just a touch of history.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for having me on today and your interest in what we're doing at Conduit. We launched Conduit Law in 2012, so we're now coming up on nearly 10 years since the firm was founded. And your introduction really hit it bang on. We are looking ideally for alternative ways of practicing law. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that in 2012, alternative was a relatively new term in the legal space, and now it's bandied about quite frequently. But what our commitment is to finding more effective and more efficient ways of driving value for our clients, and ultimately also improving the way in which lawyers work on a day-to-day basis. And that's really the goal and the mission at Conduit Law.
We talked about it in our conversation, before the interview itself. And I, read quite a bit about your firm and what you've been doing and the work that you've put into it. And the fact that you were definitely an innovator when you've established a firm. But I'm wondering if this is the right time to lose the designation alternative, and whether yours and similar law firms, are the point right now where you have a niche, but it's not really alternative. It's just a way that you do it, that may be different than some other large law firms.
I think that's an important insight, and it's something that I've struggled with, frankly, in terms of how to communicate what we do. I really prefer to think of legal services from an ecosystem point of view. And, traditionally, historically, I think it's probably fair to say that if one graduated law school and got into the practice of law, ultimately there were really three pathways. There was private practice, the conventional, traditional law firm partnership, be it a small partnership or a large partnership, but ultimately was just a variation on the same theme. The other path people could take was in-house. And then finally, the third path was some form of a government position, whether it's a crown prosecutor or a variety of call them Department of Justice, Minister of Justice type of roles. In my view, and probably in the view of many other people, certainly when we're talking about delivering services both on a B2B basis or a B2C basis, there's really an ecosystem of service providers. And what we're really trying to do is provide the right service at the right price at the right time to the client. And so alternative was a way to describe that back in 2012, 2013, 2014. But now that we have a seat at the table, it's probably fair that we can start to move away from alternative and just more closely describe what it is that we're trying to do. The truth is that we work alongside traditional law firms all the time. We like to think that we are collaborative with them.
So if we're looking at the market up until the point when COVID hit, to what extent did traditional law firms started to adopt some of the aspects of this so-called alternative model?
What we've seen is that in the UK, particularly in the early phases of the 2010s, around between 2010 and 2015, a lot of mainline large, established Magic Circle law firms were launching these businesses, these alternative law firm businesses. I like to think of them as fighting brands. Some people talk of them as sidecar businesses, but they were ultimately alternatives to the main firm. And so Allen and Overy launched Pierpoint, and Pinson and Masons has Vario, and Eversheds launched Agile, and there was a number of them all down the line that created these alternative model firms that were. I should add Lawyers on Demand, which was frankly one of the leaders, and I should have probably mentioned them first. And they were launched off from BLP, Berwin Leighton Paisner, in London. So these firms were, in the early days, fairly closely tied to the parent, if you will, and then over time have evolved to be still tethered, but maybe on a looser basis. In the US, we've seen a little bit of that development. For instance, Flex by Fenwick is one notable example. But the larger white shoe firms in the US have really not adopted it. And then in Canada, we've seen a little bit of that. McCarthy's and their, I think it's called the Alliance Service. Canada's really been a little bit in between the UK and the US, where there has been a certain amount of movement and a certain amount of development and innovation and iteration around these types of firms. But probably the UK is well ahead of us. And that may be have a lot to do with the legal reform that they went through around 2007, 2008.
Now, in our conversation, you said that you were virtual before virtual became trendy and cool.
Yeah.
Law firms had to react to the pandemic in the last 4 or 5 months, and some of that was virtualization, working remotely, which basically meant more reliance on connectivity and communications and technologies, collaboration, Zooming, and so on and so forth. From your point of view, are you seeing that this trend accelerating the adoption of what it is that you essentially knew was critical for your model right from the beginning?
I think it's a little bit early to tell. What the traditional law firms have done was they responded in as agile a manner as possible to an exogenous event that forced them to change the way they were delivering their business. But it hasn't fundamentally changed their business model. It just meant they couldn't go into work. They still want to and need to feed the business model that they're involved in. They're still stuck with that overhead. Now they've got empty offices, and they're paying rent on those empty offices. And so they're going to have to come to terms with what will be their real estate needs going forward, and how can they optimize their firm, optimize their resources, optimize their people, and optimize that physical space to best deliver on their business.
To what extent do you think this situation we're in, working remotely, being comfortable working remotely, being comfortable working remotely with clients, could affect the thinking of lawyers who work for traditional law firms and make them think about the possibility of either striking it on their own or joining kind of firms of your type?
Well, listen, our type of model is not for everybody all the time, and we've never said that. It works for many people in many circumstances in their career. And for many different personality types. I have always thought that it's really interesting that law school and law firms select for very creative people, for self-starters, highly academic, with strong logical faculties, and of course communication skills, both written and oral. They then layer on top of this a huge infrastructure of IT, where every law firm spends millions and millions of dollars annually to ensure that these firms have super connectivity across their offices and in between departments. And what they then do is they take these very creative, energetic people full of differing abilities to solve problems. They give them all kinds of IT connectivity, and then they just turn them around and say, all right, it's 1975, sit at your desk and don't move.
And I have to say that I'm thankful for law firms for investing millions in business process re-engineering and automation. That's how I make my living. But yes, I completely get what you're saying, and I think some of them are starting to get it. They're starting to get that the infrastructure that they've built actually allow them to adapt reasonably well to this situation we're in. The last question I have for you is back to focus on law firms. And in some ways, this interview is about an advice that I'm asking you to provide more traditional law firms. If a managing partner of a large firm was to beat a path to your door, seeking advice on how you think they should best leverage opportunities and risks that they're now facing, and of course the situation we're all in and beyond, and you touched on it in your previous answer, what would you tell them? What would be the one or two major things that you think they could learn from, change, adapt, and benefit from?
One of the things I would say to those managers would be listen to your words. You know, as leaders, sometimes we have to also be followers. And, and that doesn't mean lead from behind, to be very clear, but it does mean listening and being very careful. So there would be an entire generation of millennials who are coming up through the ranks who are looking for alternatives. They're looking for different ways of practicing law. They want to be engaged. They want to work on interesting files. They want to deliver top service, but they may not be willing to do that necessarily within the confines of that conventional law firm setting. And why would, as a managing partner, why would you want to lose the people you've invested so much time and energy in? Why? Find a way to keep them.
That's a great spot to wrap our conversation today. There's so much more to talk about. As always, the interviews I have are usually cut short, but hopefully you'll agree to come back in the future and we can extend this conversation. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule, remote or not, and I hope to see you soon.
Shai, it's really been a pleasure, and I thank you very much for your time. And anytime you invite me, I'd be happy to be here.
Great.